October 9th, 2008. We're at the home of Gib Dunning at his home in Drake, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Gib, and thanks for participating today.
You bet. Thank you for coming up.
You bet. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family, a little bit about what you were doing prior to joining the service.
Yes, I was born in Hill City, Kansas on March 29 of 1925, and I came from a large family of 11 of us, and interestingly enough, all of us have lived beyond the age of 70, so I'm still going, and I've enjoyed wonderfully good health all my life. At a very young age, due to the fact that I was born and raised and lived through the Depression, I was kind of farmed out at a fairly young age. At 13 years of age, I went to Ross Montgomery's farm and did chores for him and boarding room. And that winter, the 8th grade, I walked a mile and a half or so over to school and from Charlie Stagger's farm and did chores for him and received a little compensation for it later on, but not a great deal. Then shortly after that, I went to Nebraska with my brother, to be with my brother, and that was, to me, was a great moment in my life because I was going to go up there and be a cowboy. And he had cattle and horses, and I enjoyed that a lot. I worked on his ranch, if you will, small ranch, during the summer at Thedford, Nebraska, and spent 2 years up there going to my freshman and sophomore years in high school. Then I remember that my mom said, "I've been away from home a long time. It's time to come home." So I went back home for my junior year in high school. Enjoyed everything there and had all plans to spend my senior year in Hill City. However, I took a short-lived vacation with a cousin of mine to Denver and ended up with my sister in Inglewood, Colorado, and went a few months to school there and ended up graduating that final year at Elizabeth. And shortly after that, prior to that, Pearl Harbor occurred, and we all could see the draft was coming, and I said, I don't see myself joining the Navy. That didn't appeal, and the Army wasn't my cup of tea. So I said, we'll look into the Air Force, and I went immediately to Denver and took a physical, and everything worked out fine. And from there on, I went to Biloxi, Mississippi for basic training.
Can I interrupt you? Do you remember where you were and what you were thinking when you heard Pearl Harbor was bombed?
I was at home, and I said, "Where's Pearl Harbor?" When they shortly identified it as, of course, Pearl Harbor was Hawaii, but the first time I heard it was just announced that Pearl Harbor was bombed. Where is it? I didn't know where it was. Yeah. And of course, being a young fella at that time, why I didn't have any visions of being in service because that was quite some time before I would get out of school.
Right.
And I assumed that, when you're 18, you're indestructible anyway, and you aren't worried about anything. I mean, I went down to basic training, and the one incident that occurred, we went out on bivouac one day, and it was raining and thundering.
What's bivouac? Can you tell us what bivouac is?
Bivouac is just out in the woods to, just to camp and do some minor training.
Okay.
Is all it amounted to. But it was raining and lightning, and one of our young men got outside the tent to trench some water from around. These were 4-man tents, very small. And loud clap of thunder and lightning bingo, and it was moments before we all scattered out of our tents, and I saw him carrying away a young man with blood streaming from his nose and mouth and ears. And I don't know, there were probably a few more that received some lightning damage, but we were picked up immediately in buses and taken back to the barracks. One incident that occurred to me that seems rather, what is the word? Prophetic isn't maybe the word, but I got a cold, and I have said to various people, had I been home, my mom would have probably rubbed my chest with Vicks and said, go on to school. However, I went to the dispensary to get some, whatever it was they advised, and they said, you've got enough of temperature that we're going to have to hold you overnight in the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and it was not a major problem of any kind. I had a lot of sweat, cold chills, hot, but stayed there, I think, maybe 2 nights. Came back, and my buddies were all gone. One of them was a very good buddy whom I got quite well acquainted with from Nebraska, and he and I were writing to each other, but from that point he went directly to gunnery school, and I stayed around for another month or so and ended up in Lowry Field down here at Denver, and took armament training, which probably would, if I'd only done that, might have amounted to carrying bombs to the airplanes. However, I saw another opportunity, took a test, increased my IQ numbers a few points, and was able to go to another school, which allowed me to get into B-29 gunnery school, which was, as it turned out, very prophetic and a good way to go. In looking back at my friend that I met from Nebraska, he ended up going to gunnery and immediately to England, to the 8th Air Force. And quickly I'll relate that he did all of his missions but one. He had one to go. He volunteered to finish his tour on a crew that he had never flown with before, and he didn't come back. And I've wondered for years and years whatever diverted me from that same course. But anyway, I ended up going from Lowry then to, we ended up at Lincoln temporarily, formed a crew, and went to Tampa, Florida to gain our experience in flying the B-29, which was a very good plane. It was the Cadillac of bombers in World War II. It really was. It was an air conditioned, but what's the word? Pressurized, like today's jets are, and it was really a great bomber. It was just a little ahead of its time because there wasn't the time to get the bugs out of the thing, and we had some problems with it.
Had you ever been up in an airplane prior to the service?
I think not. I believe that I came home once on an emergency furlough and that was when my sister was ill, and got a short ride because I could see I'm in Air Force. I've got to be able to tell somebody that I am now flown in an airplane. And it was while I'm quite sure this has only been 60-some years ago, but I took a short ride in an airplane there. And of course, in our gunnery training in Florida, and afterwards, we got quite a lot of flying time.
Yeah.
Got a short trip over to Cuba once, which was no, but they said, you keep quiet, don't tell the authorities, but this pilot gets bored, flying these airplanes out and letting gunners do a little firing of our guns. Got tired of that, so he said, let's see some new country. And so we went over to Cuba and flew, maybe 25 or 30 miles around Cuba there and back home again. And I think that was the day that I became airsick. For the one and only time that I ever did in all the flying, of 500 hours of flying time before I got out of service, that I got temporarily airsick. But it was a great experience getting there. Of course, it wasn't long after that. We did some maneuvering or traveling around from Tampa. There was where the war ended, and we were so glad. And it was an impossible situation to describe almost, but they wouldn't allow us to go to town unless you were on leave at the time they announced the war being over. Why you didn't get off base, because they knew there was going to be just too many GIs that were out partying, and that's just what we tried to do on base. We went to the beer parlor, and every doggone one of us was looking to celebrate in one way or another. So that's the way we celebrated it.
This was VE Day?
Yeah, VE Day. That was, yes, VE Day. Now, we didn't, I personally didn't see much celebrating on, I said VE Day. No, that was a VJ Day that we did the real celebration, because that was when
You knew for sure that...
we knew
Yeah.
that the war was over for us.
Yeah.
VE Day in Europe was a few months earlier, and
Right.
we didn't celebrate that there, because that we still had a war to look forward
Sure,
to in
yeah.
Japan. Part of my crew re-enlisted shortly after the war's over, and we went to Guam. And that was kind of an interesting place. We got to see a lot of the country in that area of the world. I once got to Manila, and that was our only shot ever fired into our airplane during the whole war. And it was rather ironic. I'm thinking it might have been a high-powered rifle. Rifle shot came through the lower portion of the wing, the lower section of the wing, probably a hole the size of your thumb, and where it came out on top was about the size of your fist. And we didn't know it even occurred. We landed, and hey, what happened here? They patched it up, and we kept flying. There was minor damage to an emergency crank that lowered and raised one of our landing gear, but that was no problem, because we still had the hydraulic to raise and lower, so we had no idea that we were even hit. Another trip we took non-stop from Guam to Hawaii. We were flying the XS, or old B-29s, back from their battlefields to be going to the salvage yard in Tucson, Arizona. And we flew non-stop from Guam to Hawaii. We flew 21 hours, and ironically, we left at 1 o'clock on Wednesday, and we arrived at 1 o'clock on Wednesday in Hawaii. Took a special gas tank. We installed a large gasoline tank in the Bombay, and I can recall that we had just short of a tank car load, railroad tank car load of gasoline on that B-29. And we peeled off of the runway, and we actually jumped over the end of the big cliff and dived down to regain our airspeed after we got away from the
I've
cliff.
heard about that airstrip, yeah.
Have you? Yes, it's quite the thing. And looking back at the cliff behind us, it was rising up as we flew away from the cliff. And so we flew that afternoon, that all through the night, and there were, I think, 3 planes in our little convoy, if you will, and we flew all night and with no problems whatsoever. That was one time that, when you think about all that mileage there, I don't recall the number of miles, but let's see, I'm going to guess we were doing close to 200 miles an hour in 21 hours, so it must be 4,000 miles from Guam to Hawaii, non-stop.
Now, how would you initially got into Guam? Did you island hop, or did you take a ship over? How did you?
Took ship.
Okay.
Took a ship over, and of course I had to get seasick too.
Well, I was going to ask you. Here's a farm boy from Kansas.
Yeah.
Did you get your sea legs, or?
Yes. All was necessary was to, the first day you're out and you get seasick, and okay, take care of that and forget it. All the way, it was about 14 days, and the same way coming back, and I had said, this isn't going to happen this time. But it did, after we got in some rough weather, and the GI cans were bouncing from bulkhead to railing, and it's about that time I said, well, okay, yeah, I've got to do it. I got my lunch emptied, and then I went back, and no more problems after that.
Huh.
And we also got a trip to Tokyo. Got a chance to see Tokyo, and it was torn up real badly. But ironically, the palace grounds, which were, I don't know, 5 acres or whatever, pretty good sized, but a moat all the way around it, and within that moat, our American bombers had never touched a thing out there. Now, I'm sure that was intentional, but, and that was, as it turned out, I'm sure it was a good thing. But I have some interesting, in my opinion, newspaper article that comes all the way from Guam, newspaper. Navy printed it out, and it was a trial that I was able to sit in on while I was at Guam.
Okay.
Do you want to occurred? Yes. This is a newspaper sheet. Are we okay? From a Navy News, and what I'm showing here is a newspaper article from a trial that was given to Japanese officers and enlisted men. They had, on a little island called Chichijima, which is right near Iwo Jima, they had shot down various Navy flyers, among them George H.W. Bush. And fortunately, a submarine picked up George H.W. just before the Japs came to get him, or were in the process of catching. Anyway, these Navy flyers that didn't make it away were all 7. I believe they beheaded all of them, and in every case, I think, well, not every case, but 2 or 3 cases, they cannibalized these Navy flyers. It was the Japanese officers were having sake parties, and obviously they had realized that their war was coming to an end, and probably they were being totally sacrificed. That is an excuse that we haven't accepted totally, but anyway, they carved these boys up, and ironically, the medics who were enlisted personnel were the ones that had to do the carving and the beheading, but the officers were the ones found responsible in the trial that I'm pointing out, and they ended up, I believe I heard later, this was not a very exciting trial at the time because it was so slow. We had interpreters, a Japanese American relating from English to Japanese. Japanese corpsman, that's what they call them, related his story in Japanese. It went back to our American interpreter, and he spoke in English, answering questions that were being asked of him. But I believe they told me that 5 of the officers responsible for this. I think that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
But then I came home after. Let's see, I was released from service in 1947. I think it was March, and did various jobs and services. Drove a truck a little while because, I hadn't trained. Thought about going to CSU for college, but got acquainted with a very nice young lady, and we were married about a year or so later. Had 3 children. I lost my oldest boy in a car wreck in California. Later, he was 44 years of age, but still miss him. The other 2, my son is in Denver as an accountant and has a good job. My daughter is in California and has worked for a large company there and seems to be doing quite well. So thank goodness they are doing well. I ran service station, bought my own after years of bouncing here and there, and ended up running a service station for 15 years or so in Sterling. Moved to Fort Morgan in 1970, and later got into real estate business shortly after that, selling farms and ranches, and that worked out quite well. We had a good crew, and we apparently were doing the right things, and I never had a occupation or job, if you will, of anything that I ever did that I look forward to so excitedly. I was actually looking forward to going to work for those years. We ended up taking a trip to Hawaii and various other places in the States.
Had you ever get a chance to get back to any of the bases or the locations that you went in the States or around the world?
No, yes and no. Well, here, I might correct myself. I have gotten back to Biloxi, where I took my basic training. When I volunteered in '07, January 2007, I volunteered to build houses, or help build houses after Katrina. We didn't go to New Orleans. We went to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and there were, how many went? 20 some of us, guys and gals, and it worked out quite well. I had an opportunity, even at a late age, of just giving back to this good old USA. And let's see, there was a few more things that I had in mind that I'd like to say to get on this tape. I want to thank the Royal Flight, those people who took us to these World War II veterans.
Oh, the honor flight?
What did I say? Royal Flight?
Yeah.
How about Honor Flight? Yeah. Goodness, I just can't say enough. I think that, well, first off, we were invited to come out to Loveland Airport, or Loveland Fairgrounds, and there could have been as many as 1,000 people out there. Band was playing, people were waving, they were hugging us, they were shaking our hand. Thank you, thank God for you people. We took 3 buses, I believe, and about 100 motorcycles preceded us all the way to Cheyenne, and there we found
5 buses, actually.
5 buses?
Yeah.
Well, good. And 100 motorcycles, I believe.
Yeah.
And all the way to Cheyenne, there was people waving and yelling and honking and all this. And then we get to Cheyenne, and there might have been 500 people there. There was a band, there was military. They helped us get on the planes. We took 2 planes from Cheyenne. But the same thing occurred in Baltimore, right next to D.C. We get there, and the memorial was impressive, but I was brought to tears.
Is that right? Yeah.
Because of the turnout these people did. Cheyenne, we got there at 7:30 in the evening, and here was another row of people lining our route back to our buses. And they were yelling. I said, gee, did we win the Super Bowl? What happened? What did I do to deserve this? I did my job. That's all. We did our job. I can't thank those people enough. And this is another thing that I need to say at this time. We've been called the greatest generation. The greatest generation was the soldiers, but it was also those Americans back home. They contributed as much as I did to the war. They farmed, they brought the food to us. They went to the factories. There was Rosie the Riveter. There was all of these people. They built the tanks, the guns, the airplanes. They contributed an awful lot. And I just can't thank them enough.
Gib, I'd like to back up and just ask you a few questions throughout your story. Where in the B-29? You were a gunner in the B-29. Where was your position in the?
I was up on top. They called me the top gunner, and I had a 360-degree view from around the plane. Yeah, it was all of the turrets in these, except the tail gunner, was remotely controlled. So I could control, if necessary, I think 3 different turrets. One clear at the front end of the airplane, one immediately ahead of my sight, that was it. I was not in a turret like the old 17s and 24s. All I had was a sight, and the seat that I sat on did a 360 as well as the sight. And I could also control the tail gunner's guns if it worked out where it was necessary, where he was incapacitated.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
What were conditions like in the B-29?
Unbelievable as compared to I flew in the training. I flew in a B-24, and it's pretty hard to describe as comparing those two, because the 24, the wind whistled through.
Yeah.
You opened the doors to get at your guns, stick your guns out there, and you had to have warm clothes. Some of them, the suits were electrically heated, and gloves and all. And if you ever pulled a glove off in those old 24s and 17s, and especially if you touched metal, you probably lost a finger or whatever it was. Yeah. I've seen pictures of them that look like they probably would resemble a hot dog after it had been cooked. I mean, these fingers were unbelievable. The B-29, total comfort, roomy. We wore our parachutes at times, but mostly we did not, because we were comfortable in all ways. I mean, it was cooled, if need be. At 30,000 feet, why, you need a little heat. It also had that available, and there was no, since they were pressurized, you knew when you put that door closed, it went kerfump, and you were then pressurized from, oh, I think it was around 12,000 feet we started pressurizing, and from there on out, why we were pressurized, and didn't wear our oxygen masks only a time or two in training,
Huh.
which was great because nobody liked those oxygen
Yeah.
masks that sucked onto your face, and your talking was awkward and so forth. So that pretty well explains a lot of that B-29. It was a great plane.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a little ahead of its time. They needed to have done a little more modifying of the engines. They became heated, and we came in on 3 engines at various times, and some of them weren't so lucky. I recall that I went to the Navy barracks once, and 5 bunks were all made up, and I said, "What happened here?" "Oh, we lost that plane over the Gulf last week, and 5 enlisted men." So that was the crew that didn't come back. And I remember talking to a young man who bailed out this was in training also, and he bailed out during the very severe storm that was just ripping the plane, which is pretty hard to imagine, but this storm, thunderhead of some sort, was just bouncing that plane up and down, and the pilot gave warning to bail out. This guy bailed out, and he said that he saw other chutes bailing out, other guys bailing out in their chutes, and following down to him, and he was going up in an updraft, and they were going down, and he landed miles from them. He finally slid off the updraft, and was able to come on down, and I think they lost a guy or two in that plane. It seems to me I heard that the nose wheel collapsed on one of the pilots or an engineer that came out in front of him. And I got to fly the B-29 for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. Once the pilot asked,
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
yeah, asked us, who wants to fly this thing? And everything was about perfect that day. Only I can imagine myself, I'd never even gotten close to the steering apparatus. And I'm sure that B-29 was galloping up and down, and the wings were probably flapping like a bird. But
Was she hard to control? I mean, what was it
not really.
like? Yeah.
No, I just had to keep my eye on the, well, I believe it was an artificial air plane that I kept my eye on, and they said, we want a heading of, let's say, 160 degrees, and so it seemed to be fairly simple, but I suspect that they probably said, well, in case of dire emergency, maybe this is better than, but we had 3 qualified pilots on the RB-29.
How big was the crew? What would the B-29 carry?
11.
Okay.
Yeah. We had pilot, co-pilot, engineer, navigator, bombardier, and radar operator were commissioned officers, and the rest were gunners, except the radio operator. He was an enlisted man. And we had a long tube. Now, I don't know whether anybody's ever described this, but from the front compartment to the back, there was a long tube that was pressurized also, and we could crawl from the front to the back with no problems. There was no cold air, chill, or anything like that. And there was a few people, a few of us guys that probably took a nap up there. It was about 2.5, 3 feet in diameter and padded. And it was just quite a Cadillac of an airplane. Flying. When we went to Tokyo, I happened to be on a preferred pilot's crew, and we took staff officers up there for a staff meeting, and that was kind of an interesting flight. We came back through Okinawa and landed there, And I guess one of the officers wanted to get a little flying time and some landing. We landed, but we landed about 4 times. Bam, 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 bam. And we had to change tires. They'd peeled enough rubber off those tires. So that was merely due to the fact that he just hadn't been doing any flying. And our second lieutenant and our captains all were, they were flying regularly, and they came in. They really greased it in. We also, on Christmas Day over there, we took Santa Claus up at Guam and buzzed the field with that. And I can recall we were down to where I was looking out at a water tower that was just level with us. So we got a little close to the ground. Another incident, our co-pilot was from South Dakota, and we flew from Pratt, Kansas up there once, just training flight is basically what we called it. And he wanted to fly over his hometown. Well, we got to fly over Hill City, but we didn't get very close to the ground there. But we got up there to Tipton, and it seemed like to me he just peeled that old 29 up on one wing and just spun her around. And I thought, hey, we could shake hands with those people down there waving at us. It was close enough. Yes, it really was.
Did you ever have any incidents where you said you at times had landed on just 3 engines? Did you ever have any incidents where it was scary, or where you thought, boy, I'm wondering what's going to happen here?
Look, I might tell you about this. It's kind of it was a mistake on whomever, but I remember that one of the gunners, I was probably in my seat up there, and he said, we got a light out here on the back side of the wing. Oh, this was one of our first evening or night flights, and we saw that, or he saw this light, and he called my attention over to it, and I looked at it, and I said, gee, that could be whatever. So I called the pilot, first pilot or airplane commander, which is the last guy that you on the airplane to talk to. I said, it looks like it could be a fire inside the wing, and it's about ready to break through the aluminum of the airplane wing there. I can't say for sure, but that's what it looks like to me. Okay, so we headed for air base, which luckily wasn't very far away, and I think we feathered that engine and came in on 3, and everybody, well, we had a fire engine on each wing as we come screaming down the runway, and we landed, and everybody jumped out and ran, and somebody looked around and said, where's our radio operator? Oh, he's still up there tapping away on his radio. And he got a little upset when he found out that he was sitting there, and there was no fire. It was a small light that we had never observed in the daylight, and this was coming on to darkness, and we just weren't familiar with it. Frankly, we goofed. But our radio operator didn't appreciate that. And we blew an exhaust ring, which means there's fire all around the engine one day, and of course that engine has got to be shut down, and we feather it, is what they do, turn the blades so that they don't drag. And we went into, I think it was Savannah, Georgia that day. We were flying out of Pratt, so we were a long way from home, but we came in, and they repaired the exhaust ring that controlled the exhaust that comes out of the engine. And I can believe and know what inside that wing or the nacelle of the engine, it had some fire all right, but nothing that, and ironically, flying out of Guam across all that water, we never had any problems. Apparently by this time, it was later in the war or just after, and there was no problem with those engines out there where it really counted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What would you do for a span of time like that? How would you pass the time in 21 hours? How did you?
We had a responsibility of keeping an eye on the plane. There was like three of us, and we had a large, well, it's a flashlight is what it really amounted to, a huge light, and we would, as we flew, regardless of which side it was on, why we flashed that light to keep, within, just somewhat distance of him, probably a matter of 2 or 3 miles. On that flight, however, we went through a rain squall, and it's the only time, and I don't know whether other pilots have ever seen it or not, but I saw a 360-degree rainbow with our shadow of the airplane following in that rainbow, 360-degree. I've asked others about it, and it seems like to me nobody had seen that, but I saw that, and it moved along with us for a matter of minutes is probably all, and faded away. And looking out at those little islands of Midway and Wake and that we passed by, they just looked like all we could see was a runway down there and hardly anything else. Somebody just put a 2x4 or a 2x6 out there in the middle of that water. No, I tell you, I even was concerned that, hey, here's a navigator. We've been flying for 21 hours. Is he really good enough to find that island, or do we just keep flying? And then we've got to look for the States. And that's quite another. Will we run out of gas before then? No problem.
Yeah.
We came right in over Pearl Harbor. There they were. We could see other planes of our flights down below taxiing, and they had landed just ahead of us. So wasn't any problem. And I did get to see a fellow from near my hometown. I have even forgotten his name, but he was from a town just 10 miles away.
That's always a favorite question I like to ask. If you ever ran into anybody yet?
That was the only one that I run into two Dunnings. I think that I recall that one of them was from, this was overseas, the only place I ever run into another Dunning. And I think he said he was from New York, and another one was, I believe, from Texas. So there was a few of us, and it's rather surprising because Dunning is not a real common name.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, describe to me from the eyes of I imagine growing up, you said you traveled up and spent time with your brother and came out to Colorado, but I don't imagine you traveled too far other than that. Through the eyes of somebody that grew up like everybody else in that area, you didn't travel too far from home. What was it like going to all these locations within the States, and then these exotic locations overseas, Guam, Hawaii, Japan? What was that experience like?
Well, let's see. You mentioned Japan as a last one. This brings up a thought that has been a controversy for some people. The atomic bomb that the B-29 dropped.
Mm-hmm.
Had it not been for that, the way the Japanese fought, they just would not. They're like the Muslim terrorists today that were willing to sacrifice their life. They had the kamikaze planes, and they devastated our shipping over there terribly. Okay, my commitment or my decision was we had to drop the atomic bomb. We had to do it. Otherwise we would have been fighting the Japanese for another year, and they were prepared to fight with sticks and stones and children and women and all of them. I mean, they had proven it through the island hopping that we hopped from time to time. In fact, in reading about the Japanese mentality, even after the decision to capitulate and accept an unconditional surrender, there were military officers who insisted they could not quit even then. And they were wanting to kill the emperor over there if they had to. And fortunately, they couldn't find him or the tape. There was a tape made by the emperor prior, 24 hours prior to the final decision to tape this and or to announce this over the radio in Japan. TV wasn't around then. And those officers were not able to find the tape because it was hidden in a locked safe and they could not find it. But they were wanting to do anything but quit. So there was no doubt, in looking back especially, there was no doubt the atomic bomb had to be dropped in order to stop this terrible destruction.
Sure.
And thank God it took place so that we didn't have to go any further.
Right, right. How did you find the Japanese people when you visited after the war was over?
Ironically, I went to Japanese and found them very, very compatible. By this time, we had been there for a few months, and they were docile. Now maybe I didn't encounter any of the fanatics, the officers, but those that I encountered, there were a few businessmen, and I went there to buy souvenirs, and I remember hassling over some silk kimonos that were embroidered with beautiful designs, and we hassled over that for 5 or 10 minutes, and after that the Japanese, very good businessman, he was thrilled that I would hassle with him. And the rickshaw pullers, they were just the very lowest, I presume, of the Japanese men, and they hauled us around, and we had no inkling of the value of their yen, Japanese yen, and if the bill was 10 yen, we might give them 50 yen. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Very, very docile and very appreciative, and I'm sure they were probably living on, probably starvation wages at that time.
Yeah.
But they seemed to be very nice. But it's while the war is going on, there's a feeling toward your enemy that, thank goodness, it is it's decimated once the war is over and you can forget about it. But while it's on, you say it's either he or me.
Yeah.
And it's not difficult.
Yeah.
I didn't have to, thank goodness. But if I knew that they, of course, fortunately in an airplane you aren't close, so it's not like hand-to-hand fighting. And thank goodness I didn't have to go through that.
Did you, through your period of time of flying, did you fly with the same crew the whole time, or were you with?
No. In the States, I flew entirely with the same crew, and then the war ended, and I re-enlisted, and overseas on Guam, flew with different crews. It kind of depended on the situation. I flew a lot with the Captain Bingham. He was a West Pointer and an excellent pilot, and I always was thrilled to be flying with him because he was a very good pilot. I don't believe he was on the flight to Hawaii, but the trip to Manila, the trip to Tokyo, he was a pilot, and an excellent pilot. We asked, somewhere here it asked that how did we feel about our CO, our commanding officer in the squadron. I had a Lieutenant Packard, that was in charge, and I must have gotten a lot of good marks from this guy because I was in the hospital, ironically, for mumps when my promotion came up for review, and I couldn't be there. And I think that, no doubt, Lieutenant Packard had to say something in my behalf. But at that time, I was doing 2 or 3 things that probably enhanced my chances of. I was a duty sergeant within the squadron, writing up detailed lists of duties. I was, in the evening, I had offered my services down at the Enlisted Men Club, so I managed the Enlisted Club, and I was also flying whenever that came up, which I had asked to be continued to fly because, well, it paid more, and I enjoyed the flying.
Mm-hmm.
So I became a staff sergeant at the behest of, or with the help, I'm quite sure, of Lieutenant Packard. And that was a matter of 3 or 4 months before I received my discharge. And I think that I did speculate, I guess, on staying in service. But I was on Guam, and it was an island of 30 miles. Wasn't much going on there. However, there was quite a few Guamanian citizens of probably Japanese descent, but were very compatible with the military. We had a lot of Navy on the island as well as Air Force, and we got along fine with the native people there. I remember once we had a dance, and I'm sure the only place there could have been any evening gowns for these girls was through the military, and they came there with all of them dressed similar with a slightly different colored gown, but all of them were the same style, just one. And those girls, 16, 18, 20 years old, they couldn't dance with us GIs, but we tried anyway. And we enjoyed it, you know. Hey, this is the first lady we'd seen in, you know, all these months, and there was always a USO show around too, and that was so good of those people to come out there, you know. Then the war was over, so hey, what brings you people, good people, coming out here to keep us entertained? Gosh, it was great to see them, you know. We really enjoyed them, and we had a movie. I can remember Bing Crosby, I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. That brought tears to our eyes too, because it was Christmas time, and they showed that, which was pretty rare. But we had a typhoon once over there, blew things all just helter-skelter. We lost our barracks, we lost our mess hall. Fact is, we ended up moving to another airfield. It took everything on that airfield. About the only thing I can recall, there was a church, a little white church stood, and a few of these probably 10,000-gallon canvas water tower bags that withstood the high winds. Aside from that, took it all away. Jeez.
Wow.
Winds really blew, really blew. But we survived it, and I don't think we lost any personnel. We lost, you know, the U.S. But those barracks that we had were just clapboard, plywood barracks that were, I'm going to say 20 by 80 feet or something like that. Probably had 40, 50 men in there. No recollection of how many. And it wasn't a problem. They wiped those off right down to the floor, just like a a tornado would here in Colorado.
Mhm.
But we survived it.
Yeah.
No serious problems. Ironically, it occurred at night, so there wasn't many work people out, and we had our warnings enough that we got along fine.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier before we started this interview that a couple years back you tracked down your crew.
Yes.
And it seemed like a wonderful experience. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, that was quite an experience because this is the prior crew that I flew with through all through the training, and ironically, all I had was name and hometown, no address, no phone number, no nothing. But it wasn't that difficult. You get on the phone and you ask information to get a hold of what was his first name? I'm trying to think of Sherman. Anyway, in Tyndall, South Dakota. Okay, you call Tyndall. No, there's no Tyndall in South Dakota, or no Sherman in Tyndall, South Dakota, but there's one over here about 30 miles. He's our local optometrist. And within minutes, I had his wife on the phone.
I'll be darned.
Another one, our radar man in Long Island, New York. Well, there's only 7 million people in New York City. I called information. I said I'd like to get in touch with Edward Tess. Well, we have one here in Long Island. I said, that sounds good. Let's try it. No clue at all as to whether it's the same one. And how many of those of that name? Well, luckily there weren't very many. I had called his son in about 2 hours. He relayed the message to his father in Florida. 2 hours later, I get a call from Ed Tess in Florida. I was able to find all 10, well, 9, not 10 including myself. The 10th or 11th, or whatever you show, whatever you read it, never was able to. He was our engineer, and he was a divorced man in service, and I'm calling 55 years later. This was in 2000, year of about 2000. We were having a memorial get-together in Great Bend, Kansas, and I was able to locate relatives or themselves in, let's see, 9 out of 10, 11 including myself.
Yeah.
But it took me another 3 months or later, I guess, to find our navigator. And I would call I ended up learning that I could call a school. Oh yes, this man went to high school here in Oil City, Pennsylvania in 1942. Okay, can you help me with this man? Well, I get a call maybe 2 weeks later, and this young lady in the school district said, the schoolhouse burned down. We have no records, but we do have his name was, I've even forgotten temporarily his name, but anyway, his sister, they were able to get in touch with his sister, and they said he stayed in the military, and he's now located in Georgia. He had retired from the military as a full colonel, our second lieutenant navigator, and I got in touch with him. He was a little aloof about it, but I suppose that was one of those things after you've spent 25 years in the military, why you're a full bird colonel, and he did not come to our memorial. This is something we need to say too. There was about 6 of us ended up at Great Bend, Kansas, to observe and be prepared to well, speak if we, well, we got acquainted, reacquainted with our old crewmates. Some of them, the husband of our airplane commander, first pilot, had deceased, and his wife and daughter came, and son-in-law. See who else that came. Anyway, we got quite a few there, and we got to see the mock-up, if you will, of the the finished memorial. It's there in, it's a B-29 with a low wall and bronze plaques of our crew member stationed, if you will, around this. Ironically, we got to see Tibbetts, Carl Tibbetts. He spoke to us at our banquet there. Not a grand speaker. He didn't pretend to be. He just answered questions. Of course, at this time he was 85 years of age and nice man, but you couldn't say he was a polished speaker, but nice to have gotten that close. We didn't attempt to shake hands, but anyway, we today, our old crew has a plaque on this wall there at Great Bend with our full name of our 11 crew members, which is kind of nice. And ironically, I got to keep one of those bronze plaques, which I have today, sitting over here. The reason I got it, I had first initiated this, are we still okay there? Okay. I had initiated this crew get-together by getting in touch with a lady who was really instrumental in getting this memorial built in Great Bend. She's a teacher out at the junior college there in Great Bend, and the article came in the paper, and my sister, who lived not far away, sent the article to me, and of course it gave the phone numbers of this lady, and so in responding to her, why became quite well acquainted with her and her husband and kids, and so since we found that this one first plaque that our crew was made for our crew contained a few spelling errors. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. But anyway, there was a junior missing and some of his minor things. Anyway, this lady at the college says, if you go out to my car, I have that old plaque, bronze plaque. Would you like to have that? I got it.
I'll be darned. Yeah.
The only one that, of course, the only superfluous one, so I ended up getting it, and that, but I've got to say too, since for the sake of the picture, I've got to say, hey, I'm pretty proud of this cap that I got presented to me. We were presented with these and many other things. I can't recall all of them. A T-shirt that had some nice notes on it, comments, one of them from Winston Churchill, ironically. But anyway, that kind of sums up some of your questions.
Well, as we wind down this interview, then, is there any closing statement you'd like to make in regards? One thing in particular I'd like to ask. Oh, I guess it's a two-part question. One, how do you think that time period of your life affected your life or played into your life? And then lastly, if there's a closing statement you'd like to make before we shut down the tape.
I grew up in the military. I had been away from home for a number of years, which wasn't a problem. There were boys, you go into service at 18 years of age. And I recall that at basic training, drill sergeant says, everyone that's still in or no older than 18, would you raise your hand? And I'd say half of those were just up past 18, which was kind of a unique thing. But I had been away from home, and I never felt the hurt that a lot of these young fellas did in getting away from home. I always said, there's always a guy bigger than I am and taller than that. If it has to, it'll go clear to the president, but you're not going to get by. You're not going to out-talk or outdo any of these people. So in thinking of my attitude, I said, I'll be like the electric current. I'll take the path of least resistance. And I never had any problems there. There was guys that, I could continue to tell you little incidents of guys. Sometimes I wondered if it was intentional. They'd mess up and have to go to the guardhouse, and they hauled trash and so forth, and I had to be a guard on them. And of course, if you ever let one get away from you, you had to take his place in the guardhouse, they said. Now, I don't know whether that was true or not. But in closing, I think my message is, thank God for these wonderful Americans that they help so much. The military, we did the fighting. But thank God we had some awfully good. I mean, the greatest in generation has got to include those people that were behind us all those times and all those years. That war lasted a while. We could possibly be speaking in German or Japanese today, and thank God we had the produce, everything that wins a war. And by God, we did it.
Well, Gib, I want to thank you for participating today, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you very much for coming up. Yes, this picture was taken in Lowry Field. I'd been in the Army maybe 6 months, and it really doesn't describe what we wore. Somebody dressed that up because there were, earlier in the war, guys using that uniform, but they probably were those that flew the B-24, 17, 25s, 26s, with the fur coat and all that. Didn't wear it. We wore just everyday flying clothes. Usually, we were dressed in coveralls.
Okay.
This is the air crew that I flew with throughout the States, and we got together in the year approximately 2000. Maybe it was 2001, I'm not recalling. But anyway, that's the crew, and several of those are deceased by now, but anyway, I think this is a good conduct, and this is the victory medal, it looks like over there. These others, the dog tag, the bracelet with name, and our gunner's wings, 50 caliber shell, 20th Air Force, which was Guam, and yeah, this had to be, this was our button somebody put together. These are just military emblems there, and this represented years overseas, I believe now. kind of vague after so many years.
Oh, fair enough, yeah.
This is the old B-29 in the background here too, so I got to point that out. That's about all I can say about it. Yes, this is the bronze plaque of our crew that is now located in Great Bend, Kansas. It's right below the B-29 along a wall, and ironically, this plaque is right adjacent to who's the man that flew the B-29? Yes, Tibbets. It's right next to Tibbets' list of crew members there. As you can find those names, but these guys, several of them are deceased by now, but fortunately we had a group of about 7 of us, I believe it was, that ended up at Great Bend in 2000 to help dedicate that memorial.
Now, how did the memorial get to Great Bend, and why is it located there, and what's a little story behind that? Or
Okay, Kansas is an extremely flat state all over the whole state, you might say, and there were a number of B-29 training airports, whatever. They apparently had the least amount of leveling to do there in the flat state of Kansas, and there was 29 training stations in let's see, Great Bend. There was Pratt. There was
Walker?
Topeka had Walker. There was I don't know how many more, but anyway, it seemed like, and so the lady that did all the organizing just seemed to think it was something that ought to be done, and since there were so many stations in Kansas that that could be honored, why she just kind of found a central location, and it seemed to work.